You can join us live for our next BookFunnel webinar. Check out the link in the description for more details. We hope to see you there.
Today, I'm glad everybody's here. We've got a fun workshop for everybody today. This is going to be a little different from some of our other webinars where we have this fancy PowerPoint presentation and all this stuff. We're literally in MailerLite right now, and we're going to be building a newsletter from scratch is what we're going to be doing. I have some of the basic framework out of the way, so we have something to work with, right? But we're going to be basically building it from scratch, but also talking about like what should go in your newsletter. And then at the end or toward the end, once we get through all of that stuff, you might have ideas of your own, or maybe there's something that you want to see like a mock-up of, or you have an idea and you just want to see what it would look like. Like, how would you do this, right? We'll take those suggestions and I'll add them to this newsletter. We'll do a little mock-up with it. We're also going to be using Canva today for some images and so forth. So the two tools that we're using in this workshop, MailerLite and Canva. However, you don't have to use that specific combination. This is going to apply to a lot of other things. So if you're not using MailerLite, for example, right? If you are using ConvertKit or any other newsletter builder, right? We're not talking about specifically how to use MailerLite. We're talking about some general principles, right? Of how to build a newsletter. So this is going to be fairly universal. You could also use, instead of Canva, you could use like BookBrush. I know there's some other Canva alternatives out there. If Canva isn't your speed, that's fine. This isn't a webinar on how to use Canva. This is a webinar on building a newsletter from scratch. Now, for those of you who have already built your newsletter, and maybe, which I hope is probably most of you, maybe there's some of you who haven't done this yet, but this should still be enlightening for you folks as well, because we're going to be talking about some things that maybe you haven't thought of, maybe some things you haven't thought to include in your newsletter, or maybe just in a different way. A lot of this is also going to be based on one of our recent newsletters, recent webinars, where we talked about how to make an effective newsletter. And this is kind of the practical putting it into practice sort of workshop. Right? That webinar is actually on bookfunnel.com/videos. That's where all of our webinar replays are. They're all stored there, so you can go find them and watch them. Obviously, I would wait until this one's over to watch any of the other ones, right? But you can go back there and watch that one. I think it would be a great kind of primer for this one as well. But if you didn't happen to see that one yet, don't worry, right? There's not going to be anything here that you're going to miss. I'm going to explain everything as we're going along, and we'll go through all of this step by step. Right. Like I said, again, if you have any ideas, anything that you want to see me do here in this newsletter that we're building, or perhaps you have questions along the way, you can put those in the Zoom chat. Kelly and Emma are here with me today. They're two of our other author support specialists, and they are going to be in the chat there to help you all if you have questions, and they'll be keeping track of your questions as well as we go through things, so we can get to those at the end. And then also any suggestions or ideas you want to see me create here while we're actually in the middle of building this newsletter, right? They'll also help with that and kind of collect all those suggestions so that we can put them into use. So we are in MailerLite right now, like I said, and I have here a sort of blank newsletter template that we're going to be building, and we're going to build this whole thing from scratch, pretty much. Right now, I have some text in here already. This is really just so I don't forget. This is kind of like my notes, and then we'll be building it from there. Is how we're going to do this. So let's talk about first what should go in your newsletter, because there's lots of things that you can add to your newsletter, and you're not always going to be adding the same things. Right? At certain times, you're going to be focusing on different things. Maybe you have a new release. Maybe you have, I'm trying to think of other things. You have a new reader magnet that's coming out. There's a promotion you're doing. You have some new bonus content, things like that. I don't want to spoil everything we're going to talk about today, but your newsletter is going to vary, and it shouldn't all just be the same thing every time. For the most part, you want to offer something new. And so there is a question about what should go in here. And maybe this is something that you're unsure about. Maybe if you're starting your newsletter, you're not sure where to begin. You don't know what to put in there, right? Maybe you're getting advice from some people that sounds like it makes sense, but maybe that just doesn't appeal to you, that method. There might be some things I suggest today that might not appeal to you either, right? In exactly the way that I have a certain way I do my newsletter, but I think you can get the idea of at least the kernel of the idea that I'm suggesting, and you can do it in your own way too. So there's no one way to do a newsletter, right? Generally speaking, though, we want to start with a greeting, right? Is usually what we'd recommend, right? You want to have some kind of greeting at the beginning of your newsletter, right? And this would be every newsletter, 2 to 3 sentences. It can be very brief, right? If you have some sort of tagline to go with your newsletter as well, and a header image, that also helps. So, for example, we have this image up here at the top. This would be a great place to put a header banner image. An example that I have, we have one of our, uh, we use this pen name for all of kind of our demo stuff, Sissy K Pickle Bottom, right? So I have an example here of what an image like this might look like that you could put as your banner image, perhaps your pen name, your author name, a logo, some sort of tagline that you could include, and putting that at the top, right? Just a nice, appealing way to make your newsletter very recognizable, right off the bat. Every time they open your newsletter, they're going to see that banner image up there at the top. Right. So, for example, here we can find, I should have uploaded this one. I think I did. I think I uploaded the logo, which we could also do instead. So, for example, I could select this logo image and that will show up here at the top, right? And again, another simple way to just signal to the reader when they open up your newsletter every time, what they see here should be consistent. And they know when they open it, oh, it's that author. Because believe it or not, they're probably getting emails from multiple authors. And they might not remember you by name, right? But they might visually remember, oh, yes, that's that author. That's right. Like for example, my last name is a mouthful. I'm sure readers don't even, it's that guy named Jack with the funny last name, right? Is what they're probably thinking. Right? So if I can visually remind them, oh, hey, this is this guy's newsletter that you're getting, that's helpful. Right? We want to signal that very strongly. And then maybe you have a title for your newsletter, right? Maybe your newsletter has a specific name. You might have done that. Or maybe you just want to have a generic sort of greeting here that changes with every newsletter. There's a few ways to do this. Right? So, for example, we could put in here, uh, here's what I've been up to, right? Well, actually, that might go down. Let's just say, howdy, folks. Let's do something like that, right? Something as simple as that. Doesn't have to be anything too complicated. And then a brief greeting, right? This would just be something like, welcome to my newsletter. I'm going to typo this stuff as I'm typing it, right? For sure. So bear with me. Welcome to my newsletter. Here is where, or this is, right? This is where I share information about my books, upcoming releases, and more, right? Something like that. It doesn't have to be anything too complicated, right? That's the type of thing that should be at the very beginning. A lot of this initial text is also going to tend to populate in part of your subject line as well. So you will see if you test your newsletters, which you should, that first initial line of text will often show up, especially on mobile, but even in a browser, when they're previewing the email, it will show up underneath the subject line. Right? Now, beyond that, you can include some personal updates or a blog post. There's a couple ways to go about this, and that's why I'm giving you a few options here. Some authors really like to do the sort of Christmas card style newsletter, where they are sharing, like, here's what I've been up to, here's what my dog did, right? This is what my kids and I did, or this, that, or the other, and give those personal updates. And you can absolutely do that. If you're going to include it in the content of the email, I recommend keeping it to 3 to 5 paragraphs at most. Readers, for the most part, are going to be reading your newsletter, opening it, and reading it on a mobile device. They're going to be reading this on a phone, right? So if you're writing a long bit of text on a mobile phone, right, as they're scrolling, that's going to take up probably the whole screen by the time you get to 3 to 5 paragraphs. And that's about as much as you would want to do. If what you're writing, whether it's a personal update or a blog post, whatever it happens to be, is longer than that, it's totally fine. I recommend linking to that externally. And so alternatively, what you can do here is have a nice image. We'll come back and we'll create an image for this here in a little bit. We can have maybe a brief description here and then a link to that in our external blog so that it's not taking up all of that real estate in our newsletter. One thing we see a lot in BookFunnel author support, because we do help authors with their newsletters, right? Usually this is in the context of BookFunnel promos. Right? So for those of you who know how BookFunnel promos work, you are expected to share those promos, those promo links and swaps too, with your newsletter. And so you're supposed to put them in your newsletter and share them that way. And every click that you get counts toward your reputation. Sometimes authors will share in earnest, but they don't get very many clicks. And they wonder why. And maybe they run into some issues with their reputation and they'll come to us. And one of the first things we do is we look at their newsletter. And what we tend to see, there's a few things we tend to see, but when an author is actually sharing, usually what it is that they have written a very long personal update or something like that, very long bit of text. And then the bottom of the email actually gets cut off. Gmail does this. A number of other email service providers do this. They cut it off and they have to click a link to see the whole message. And then down there at the very bottom is where they're sharing their promos and swaps. And so readers just never make it down there to click on them. That applies to promos and swaps, and that's a good thing to know. But that also tells us something else about reader behavior in your newsletter. If you're trying to share a few different pieces of information in your newsletter, which is totally fine to do, you're going to want to make sure that each one has relatively equal real estate for the most part, right, in your newsletter. Because if your personal update, maybe you always have a personal update at the beginning of your newsletter. If you have a personal update there all the time and it's very long, most readers aren't going to get to the other stuff, whatever that happens to be, whether it's promos or your new release or your reader magnet, whatever it is, your survey, whatever it is you want them to also get to, there's not enough room. And so it can vary. I'll show you two here in a little bit. We'll be able to preview what this will look like on mobile, and you'll be able to see it's a dramatic difference when you go from desktop to mobile. Okay? So I recommend if it's longer than 3 to 5 paragraphs, you should have it linked externally. And this also doesn't have to be a personal update. I include blog posts here because, number one, blog posts are great for nonfiction. Nonfiction authors, say hi in the chat. I'm sure you're here with, right? Right. It's great for nonfiction because a blog post it can be about a specific topic. You're providing ongoing value. But you can even do this for fiction too. This is what I do. I personally, not the kind of author who wants to share personal updates with my newsletter. It's not my style. Not what I personally do. And so instead, I do regular blog posts and I talk about my characters, or I talk about the world I've created or the setting or something like that. And so that's something you can do instead. It's providing extra value. It's a way for the reader to still sort of connect with you because you're talking to them in a more personal way, right? But this is the type of thing that usually people are thinking of first when they think of a newsletter. Oh, this is what I've been doing, or this is what I've been up to. But you have alternatives. A blog is a great alternative to that if that's not your style, right? But again, I wouldn't include a full, 500 word, 1,000 word blog post directly in your newsletter. I would link to that externally, right? And as always here, before we move on, I want to point this out too. You'll notice here the way I've done this, and granted, I know this is sort of a template. We're going to come in and we can fill some of this in later. But notice what we have here. We have a headline or a heading. We have an image that's going to go here, right? We'll add that a little bit later once we go over to Canva. We have a short description, maybe 2 to 3 sentences, right? Or if it's going to be the whole post, again, maybe 3 to 5 paragraphs. And if we were going to link externally, we have this button here. This is what I call and what gets called the content sandwich, right? Where I am giving you, there's multiple things going on here, right? Because there's the heading that's going to grab your attention, the image, a short description, and then the button, which should have a call to action on it. That's the content sandwich. And you're going to essentially everything that you're going to include in your newsletter can fit into this same style, right? So maybe you have 4 or 5 different things that you're wanting to include in your newsletter. Right? Maybe you have some promos, you have a promotion you're doing on some of your books. Maybe you have an upcoming release and you're asking for, or you're looking for ARC readers and something else, your personal blog post. That's 4 things, right? Instead of making all of those a really long diatribe, right? You can make these 4 little bite-sized sandwiches that you can just add right in here, right? In this style. You should also include your books in your newsletter. And I know this sounds obvious. It should be obvious. But we see a lot of newsletters too where authors don't actually include their own books. This oftentimes has to do with, for example, if you're doing a lot of promos and swaps. I see a lot of authors who will heavily focus on that, and their newsletter just becomes dominated by their BookFunnel and promos and swaps that they're participating in. And essentially, all the readers on their newsletter are engaging in that, but not necessarily engaging in their content. You need to, at some point, feature your own books. In fact, that should be the primary thing that occurs in your newsletter, right? So I say this as a reminder to folks, and many of you are probably already doing this, and it should be obvious, but take a look at your newsletters and see how clear is it that this is about your books, right? If other things have started to take over, right, or become more prominent, like promos or even your personal updates, right? If that's taken over and has become the primary thing, you might want to take a step back and try to add a little more balance to that, right? One thing I do for this, when I share promos, I share them on a specific day of the week. And all of my other newsletters I send, promos are not the featured thing. They're only featured on one specific occasion, right? And everything else focuses on what I'm doing with my writing, my books, etc. Right? So you have to keep your focus there. It can be very easy sometimes to try to cram a whole bunch of stuff in there, right? So do you have an upcoming release? Are you running a promotion, something like that? Again, you'll see the content sandwich here, right? We would have a headline, a nice image, a sentence or two description and then a call to action with a button. You should also think about including a survey. A survey is a great way to get to know your readers. And so as you're going through a survey here, right? You can ask them to rate your book. This is a great way to find good candidates for reviews and ARCs. We did an entire webinar on surveys, by the way. I recommend you watch that. We're not going to be going into too much detail about that, but this is kind of just a short brief why you should include these, right? Ask them to rate your book, and you can filter out who rated it 4 or 5 stars, and then you can follow up with those readers and ask them to review it. Right? You can ask them, how frequently they want to hear from you. This is a good one to include in an automation sequence as well, or for your new subscribers. Hey, yeah, I want to hear from you once a month, or once a week at most. Right? This is good information. And then you can also ask an open-ended question. Right? This can be fun as well, and it's engaging for your readers. Right? They'll look for these surveys if you include them on a regular basis. And because they're engaging, they're doing something when they open your newsletter, that means they're more likely to stay subscribed. It's going to help retain them, and they're going to be more likely to open your newsletter and engage with it as well. Give them a look at what's coming next, right? So what are you doing? You might see how this could fit into a few different places, but the age-old advice is that you should always be writing the next book, and that's your best marketing strategy, right? And that's because your readers are hungry for more. A lot of readers are looking for the next book. The issue that readers have, right? If we're talking from a marketing perspective, a marketing term that comes up is pain points, right? Which means, right, you have to find out what your customer's pain point is. Right? What problem is it that your product solves? What pain does your product relieve? Right? Well, if you're selling Advil, it's really obvious, right? But if you're selling books, what is it? It's the pain of not having anything to read. It's not having the next book. Have you ever finished, for example, some of you might know this feeling, if you've read an author's series or read an author's books and you read everything they've written, and perhaps to give the best context to this example, maybe it's an author who has passed and you've read everything they've written and you get to the end of it and it's bittersweet because that's it. It's over, right? That's the pain point that most readers, voracious readers, have. They've gotten to the end, it's over, and they want something more. That's the problem you're trying to solve. And so that's why I think it's very important to keep them in the loop with what's coming next. What are you doing? Where are you on the first draft of the next book? How far have you gotten through the revisions, right? Cover reveals, all that kind of stuff. Sneak peeks. Give them that little trail of breadcrumbs leading up to what's coming next. Bonus content. This is something I also recommend that you include in a newsletter if you have the spare time and energy for it, right? Not everybody can necessarily, manage releasing brand new free content every week. I totally understand that. But at whatever pace you can, I think it's something that you should try out. It's offering value. It's going to help retain them on your list. They're going to want to stay on your list. Right. This is kind of a reader magnet in a way because it's aimed at holding them and keeping them on your list, keeping them subscribed. You can run this like your own personal Kindle Vella, right? Or Radish, or Insert, whatever you prefer there, where you're releasing chapters on a regular basis of something you're working on. Maybe it could be your upcoming release, or maybe it's dedicated for this exclusive content. Or you could release a short story maybe once a quarter or once every month, or whatever your pace allows you to do. Exclusive bonus content is going to help keep people on your list. It's going to keep them engaged. They're going to know they have something of value that they get from being a subscriber to your list. And then if you do BookFunnel promos and swaps, you should include those too. Obviously, that's part of doing BookFunnel promos and swaps. And my advice is that, again, don't let them dominate your entire newsletter. Don't let it take over your newsletter. And the best way to do that is to use a dedicated external landing page that you point your readers to. And on that landing page is where you have links to all your promos and swaps. We've talked about this a number of times in past webinars. And so I think this is a good place to start for even if you're new, because it means that you only have to use one of your content blocks on your promos and swaps in your newsletter. Right. And you don't have to have multiple content blocks for each individual promo you're in. It means you'll have more consistent clicks in your promos. You might be able to participate in one or two more, depending on how you do it. Right? And it just makes it more consistent and effective. Right? So you should include, if you're going to participate in BookFunnel promos and swaps, it should go in there. I mean, it's a requirement. It should go in there somewhere. But again, having a link to an external page is what I recommend so that your newsletter is not taken over by all of it. And then if there's something that you guys want to see, we can add that here as well. If you want to see a mock-up of one of these elements, right? Now, for example, I'm using a blank template in this email. We're going to actually get to kind of working on some of these individual elements and crafting these here, right, as we go along. But this is a pretty blank template. What you'll notice, it's just a white background. We're going to be adding some images here. We've got buttons. We can change colors. The nice thing is that MailerLite does give you some fancier templates as well. And so we can, there's some of these here that you can browse through. The one thing I will say, there's some of these that are focused on authors, for example, right? So this one here is an example of one. This is also one that's focused on a book specifically. There's going to be elements in here that you may or may not want to include. And so you kind of have to ask yourself how much you want to fuss with it. There are some of these templates that are really good. However, the images that you see here in these will all be in the template if you select it and you create a campaign from it, and you will have to change some of those. So a couple things, right? If you like one of these templates, go for it. You can grab one of them. You can change out the images. You can change it and customize it, make it whatever you want, right? That's kind of a personal choice, which is why for today's example, I'm just going with a very basic, right? A very basic example today, right? But another thing to keep in mind is that mobile is also going to change how these look. And right now, what you're seeing is kind of a preview of the desktop version of these templates. And they're not going to look as fancy in some ways when they're on mobile as they do here in this preview, right? So that's something to keep in mind as well. But you can play around with these. Just know you're going to have to customize them, right? A lot of these graphical elements that they add, the colors and so forth, you'll have to customize those things. That's something you can do if you want to. You want to start from a certain starting point, or you can just go with a blank canvas. And you can always come in here and add additional graphical elements of your own, like background images and so forth, right? So you can always come back and add that in later with this blank canvas. But if you need some place to start, you can do that here as well. Okay. So I'm going to do an example of one of these content. Let's actually go with this one here, right? We're gonna advertise our reader magnet, let's say. So I have an example of an image here that I've created. This is with another one of our example covers. And the way I built this was pretty simple. For those of you who are familiar with Canva, right, you have a lot of tools at your disposal. All we're going to do here, I'll kind of show an example of building this again. What I recommend you do, if you're looking for a background image, is just come to the elements section here on the left-hand corner. And I want you to search your genre or keywords. So if you're a horror writer, right, there we go. And I recommend looking at photos, and you can find all sorts of horror-related images, right? I'm in science fiction, for example. So I can find all sorts of science fiction related images that, depending on your Canva plan, some of these are free for the free plan. Some of them you have to have a paid plan for, and you can use these as background images, right? So I could throw this image into the background, and then I could add some elements like text and so forth in front of this, which is what I've done here, right? So this is a romance title. I have a headline here, right? Maybe this is for our reader magnet. And this actually is a mock-up is what this is. If you are familiar with Canva again, it has these mock-ups that you can use. Whoops, I actually need to back out. There we go. It allows you to select all different kinds of things and add images to them. And it has tablets and so forth, which I think are a good choice for this, right? So for example, you could even use an image like this, right? So we have a woman here reading on a tablet. You could add your book cover and insert it into this very image. Maybe she's reading one of our horror titles. We'll add it there. There we go, right? And this is a very simple and easy way to do this, right? And you can incorporate that in. But, right, however you want to do it, right? We have this image here. All we have to do once we've gotten this is download. We're going to download this specific one, if it will let me. So we'll take a moment here, and then we'll just upload that to MailerLite. So it's going to download that for a moment, and we'll drag and drop that in here. For those of you who haven't had to do this before, I'm going to show this kind of once so you get the idea, right? I'm uploading that image and selecting it, and there we go, right? We could say, if this is a free book, maybe that will be our headline, and we'll say something short and catchy. Grab your free copy of Lies and start reading today, and so forth. Maybe we could include a little bit more if we wanted to. And a call to action is always good to include in a button, right? So we can say start reading now, something to that effect. And then our link probably to our BookFunnel landing page, whatever it happens to be, we can include in here. We can customize the colors. This is specifically how it's going to look like in MailerLite. We can choose, maybe a complementary color is probably best here, right? Because this purple doesn't match exactly, but maybe we could find a complementary color. Or we could add our own color here using a hex code. If you happen to know what the hex codes of your colors are, another tool that I recommend you check out that Canva has is a color palette generator. I'll see if I can, Emma, Emma or Kelly, if either of you could grab the link to that, because I should have had that open. But you can upload your cover image and generate a color palette from it. And that's a good way to it's a good way to get those hex codes that you can use for things like this button color if you want to have specific colors for elements in your newsletter. Now, I want to, for a moment here, we'll save that. And so that's how that's going to look like somewhat on mobile here. Thank you, Kelly. Let's see. Oops, I opened that in a new window. That's not going to be as helpful. I'm going to need to open that in this window. There we go. There we go. And so all we have to do here is upload an image, right? Here's an example image. You can see that's already uploaded, and it gives us the hex codes. So it's pulling colors from this image. So I could take one of those and then use that hex code when I'm customizing elements of my newsletter, right? It's useful in other places as well. It's useful in lots of places. Now, really quickly, what I want to do here, because I talked about how it's going to look different on mobile and desktop, we'll go into preview mode, and hopefully everybody can see this well. I think this should still show up just fine here. It's going to take a moment to load, but this is going to allow us to see what it's going to look like on desktop versus what it's going to look like on mobile. And I recommend that you do this with every newsletter that you send so that you have an idea of what it's going to look like. Also, a test email. Nothing can beat a test email. Send yourself test emails every time and verify them. So this is going to look pretty much like what we expected. Our button looks like it's disappeared here. I don't know what's up with that, but this is what we expected based on what we just generated and what we just created. But if we click mobile, you're going to see everything gets smaller, it gets compressed. And so they're pretty much going to have just room to view one thing at a time, right? So our survey, right? Each content block is going to fit on the screen one at a time. And so if we have too much information in here, which arguably in this example, there's too much information, right? There we have the greeting, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 content blocks in here. That's probably a little excessive, right? I'd say 3 to 5 is the sweet spot, right? But again, this is an example. They're probably not going to scroll all the way down. It could get cut off by Gmail. We want to avoid that if we can, right? We want to avoid that if at all possible, right? Our button is there. I guess it just disappeared in the preview mode. I don't know why that was, but it is there, right? Right. So this is an example of what I would recommend doing. If you're not super savvy with Canva, right? A couple things. Canva does have some templates there. If you search through design, and you can look for romance author, for example, right? It will give you some romance author templates here that will fit the dimensions that you have chosen. So perhaps you see one of these that, maybe you have a book launch. Maybe you like this template. And then you can come in here and you can change all of these elements. It allows you to change these images, the colors of all these elements as well. You can, obviously, this is probably not any of you. I don't think so. You could delete that. You could replace that with your own image. You could use any one of these elements. So if you are not super savvy or you're not a graphic designer, I still recommend Canva because you have a lot of these templates that you can grab and use and just change the text. You can change the colors, and you don't have to be a graphic designer to do all this. I recommend that you find a few simple templates. Some of these are going to be very involved. Like this one is for a book launch and it has dates and times and all this information. It's probably a little excessive, right? Something more like this is probably a very simple, right? Something more like that. Or even this one. I do like this one as well. Right. And these are mock-ups, it looks like, where you can drag and drop your cover into as well. It keeps it very simple. And again, you don't have to be a graphic designer in order to do this, right? So, Emma and Kelly, before we get too far into this is this workshop style here. I want to get some answers to some questions that folks might have, show some examples here before we get to the top of the hour. So if there's anything that people have requested and they want to see me make it from scratch, we can do that. And then we'll continue, but I want to make sure we get to questions and so forth before we get to the top of the hour, because I know some folks are going to have to drop out at that point. We will continue past the top of the hour and continue working on this, and all of this will be included in the replay, of course. But I want to make sure we get to that here before we get too far along. So what do y'all need to know, or what do y'all want to know?
Just so you know, we've got more requests for newsletter sequences, automations.
Yes, that is a thing. Yes, we will do that. We will an automation sequence webinar is in the works. Because or a welcome sequence webinar, probably specific to that. We can definitely go over that.
Okay, well, one of our first questions early on in the webinar was how does one embed a video sample into a newsletter?
So you can do that. MailerLite, for example, they have multiple blocks that you can choose from. And videos are one of those as well. And so you could add a video, much like you would add an image. Whoops, there we go. And then you would just have to, it's asking for a URL here. So you'd have to have the video uploaded somewhere where you can use a link to it. YouTube, for example, would be the simplest one, and it would insert that video here. In all likelihood, I don't know that the video would actually play in the newsletter itself. They may be instead sent to that external link. That's something I've personally not toyed around with, but I know there are some newsletters that might have different features in that regard, so it would probably vary a little bit. depending on your newsletter too. The service you're using, I mean, your newsletter service provider or mailing list service provider. But yes, you can add video. And it's another great interactive way to engage with your readers. Like if you're on TikTok or you're on YouTube, right? I realize I have a typo in this. just I just realized that now. It's in a very handwritten font, and so there's an extra letter there that's not supposed to be there, but I didn't notice that because of the font. But oh well, it'll happen. This is real, folks. You'll create your newsletter, and there will be typos in your newsletter, and your readers will let you know. I think what did I do at the end of 2023? I had a typo in my subject line where it was my last newsletter for 2023, and I accidentally said 2024, and I got lots of emails about that. It was good fun. It was nothing. It was nothing too. How should I say? They weren't mad at me or anything. It was funny.
I'm just answering a question in chat about typos as reader engagement and
Yes.
is being recorded, but yes, I may be guilty of occasionally doing a deliberate typo, so I can resend a newsletter to increase some traffic, but I didn't say that out loud.
Yes. Yes. No, they can't. They can. It works. In fact, it's a thing that gets used a lot, not just in newsletters. It's a social media thing that gets used. If you intentionally mispronounce a word in a video, it gets people to comment on it and increases engagement. Yeah, that's a whole can of worms there.
Some of the authors whose newsletters I'm on do that, and I can tell when it's deliberate, and I'm like, oh, that's fun.
Yes. Yes.
I know what you're doing. The next question is from Amy. Can you show adding alternative text? I've been seeing on several author groups. This is important for email readers.
Oh, yeah.
Text for accessibility.
Yeah. So alternative text, it would be the alt button here. I'm hopefully this pop-up is showing for everybody. You would just put alternative text in here, and you would describe what it is, or probably reiterate, because they're not. In some cases, you could describe the image. In some cases, you just might want to reiterate, the call to action or something like that. So you have a few choices, right? You have a few choices here when it comes to alt text. So for example, we could say, if we're thinking more like accessibility from that point of view, we may want to describe the image. So we might want to say book or cover of the author's latest free book, Lies, right? For example, that would be an example of a descriptive alternative text, which you might want to use for some images. However, you may instead want to use alternative text that is simply reiterating the call to action or telling them what to do, because your description, right, might not be, it might not always make sense, the way you would describe something to someone. And so the more functional approach is be something like, get your free copy of Lies by Sissy K. Picklebottom, right? For example, right? And that could be your alternative text, right? So yes, like Julie just said here in the chat, for visually impaired readers, it's great for accessibility. There's other things that it can help with as well, but yeah. So when you're describing something, if you're thinking of, right, if you're not visually impaired yourself, maybe your description isn't always going to convey exactly what you intend. So I would suggest maybe trying to be more functional with it in some contexts. And like I did there with this example, using it kind of like an additional call to action, for example, maybe a bit more descriptive call to action.
Okay. Nico is asking, is MailerLite your preferred or recommended newsletter service, or do you have any opinions on Button Down, ConvertKit, or Substack?
Yeah, MailerLite is just it's a very common and popular platform that a lot of authors use. I happen to use it. I honestly, there's a lot of options out there that are great. I suggest that you use what works for you based on your needs. So there's no kind of one size fits all. You might find you like MailerLite, you might find there's other tools that you prefer instead, and that's fine, right? Uh, ConvertKit is great. I've worked with ConvertKit a long time ago. I worked with Mailchimp. I personally not a fan of Mailchimp, uh, but other people I know really prefer it over anything else. So um, you would want to gauge based on that, right? What is it that you, what platform works best for you? If you prefer Substack, go for it, right? I think it's a personal choice, in all honesty, which I know doesn't necessarily that is my opinion, right? That is my opinion. I prefer MailerLite because it's fairly simple. There's not a whole lot to fuss with, but that might mean that there are some features that MailerLite doesn't have that another service has, and you might want those features, as an example.
And Catherine. Okay. We'll put that down there. One sec, Substack. All right. Amy doesn't a blog post image. All right, these two are kind of similar. Is there a certain length to go where the cutoff would be in regards to the fold? That's Amy. And then Mike is, doesn't the blog post image push everything else further down the newsletter, like a long blog post? Is it worth it?
Yeah, so there's okay, first question, how far down, right? This can be tricky to tell, which is why I recommend you do a test email. If you're using Gmail and that's where you receive your email at or what have you, that's what I recommend you do. Gmail is going to be the most common one where this happens the most. So I would recommend that you test with a Gmail account, send yourself a test email and see. The as far as pushing everything down, yes, the image is going to take up space. It is going to push things down. However, there's a difference between how someone is going to absorb and read that information when it's in visual form versus when it's just text, right? And if it's text, I did see a question about this come through, I think, and this is relevant. I think Nico asked opinion on minimalist or plain text newsletters. Absolutely. They can definitely work. If you prefer to just go with text, you can do that. In some cases, that might be the most effective. You're still going to want to be careful about how much text is included, right? Because your readers are going to be I want you to kind of get into their mindset. They're going to see the notification on their phone. They got an email from you and they're going to open it because most of your readers are going to be opening your emails on a mobile device and they're going to be in the middle of doing something else, maybe. And they're going to see that. And they might not have the time to sit down and read, right, a long form newsletter. So even if you did go super minimalist, I would still recommend having links to something external, right? Something that they could save, a link they could save for later with a clear call to action to go do that. But it can be done. It can be done that way. You don't have to use image heavy newsletters. However, the advantage of an image, right? If we go back to the preview mode here, I think it should load back into mobile here, is you can very quickly communicate information with an image, and they might not be spending a whole lot of time reading the email. So they might scan through it and see, oh, okay, right? Here's their blog post. Oh, a free book. Cool. And they can quickly scan through and see what's there and then pick out what's interesting to them. And so that, I think, is the advantage of a more visual newsletter that has an image like this. You also don't have to do this shape of image, right? You could do an image that is more that is wider than it is long and doesn't take up as much room. This is just an example, right? So if you wanted to do something that would be kind of like half this length, right? It wouldn't take up as much room vertically. You could absolutely do that too. And then you have more vertical real estate to play with, right? The advantage of the visual, though, is start reading now, right? Free book. My eyes are just scanning this really quickly. And then that button that, again, the preview mode is getting rid of, but there would be that button there, right, with the call to action. And readers who want to get that free book are going to be able to quickly scan this without having to sit there and read it. And they're going to click the button and get the free book. And those that aren't are going to scroll down and they're going to be like, oh, a survey. It's asking me a question about this. Cool. And that might be what they're interested in, right? So that's the advantage of, I think, a more visual newsletter. In a way, it's still kind of minimalist. It's just minimalist, but relying on images versus minimalist that relies on just plain text. If that makes sense, right? There's no right or wrong way to do your newsletter either. And you might find that a different method works for you and you get more engagement from it. Maybe your readers do respond really well to a more text-based newsletter. You should do that. Some images should still probably be included, right, here and there. But you should also experiment with things. If the point here is that if you're really lost and you don't know what to do, I think this is a good starting point, right? Is to start with an image, a headline, make that content sandwich. And if you don't want to go with a custom, image or anything like this, you can use those templates that I showed. You could also just use the book cover. You could just use the book cover, right? You don't have to be a graphic designer, right? Right? You can do something simpler, and that's fine.
Okay. Next question is from Caitlin. Interested to hear how you focus on your books without being too spammy about it. A lot of authors have been cautioned against talking about our books too much.
I guess what are you the issue I would see there is what are you worried about happening? I guess is the question I would have you ask yourself. You could do anything too much, right? For sure. I think it's how you do it. You should have something new to say, right? So, for example, talking about your books could be a blog post about one of your characters, right? Maybe you have a character that you want to talk about. And oops, I copied and pasted that. Oh, well. I'm gonna get rid of this stuff here for a moment. Let me reposition this. Let's see, I'll get rid of this element. And now if I'm gonna let's look for a romance book character. We'll just look up something, right? Let's see, let's find here, or maybe we'll have to describe a character. Probably what we're gonna have to do, right? This backfired on me here. I'm not a romance author. I know what I would do in science fiction, as I would look up some science fiction character or something. Or maybe you do have a graphic already that you could use. Let's get rid of the word book. I think that's right. And so, right, maybe here we go. We have a couple here, right? I'm just making this on the spot, right? I'm gonna zoom that out, move it over, center it, and let's reposition that layer so it's underneath, right? Very simple. I can add some text. Let me take that, right? And let's give these characters a name, right? Emma, can you throw out 2 names for me?
Clyde and Bonnie.
There we go. Right.
I don't know why that came to mind. Oh, that's a shame.
Right. And we'll say learn more about, right, something like that. Here, let me just rearrange this here into a headline that looks decent. There we go. Right, something like this. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to write a blog post about these 2 characters and their relationship, the tropes that romance readers really like, right? The things that they're looking for. And this on its own might be interesting to those readers. And you're disguising how you're talking about your books. You're disguising it. That would be my recommendation. So I think if you're always hitting the same thing over and over again, right, your readers are probably going to start to get tired of it. Yes. And so you have to learn how to disguise it. I'm going to write a blog post about these characters. Or I'm going to write a quiz. Right? Because one option you do have in MailerLite, in addition to surveys or quizzes, you can include a quiz about those characters. A lot of different things that you could do. A lot of things, right? Even offering like a bonus chapter that's specifically, it's exclusive to your newsletter. And when you do that, you're talking about your books, but you're not repeating the same thing over and over again. You're disguising the repetition, right? By packaging it in a different way. You do have to do that to some extent. You don't necessarily have to, right? You're not beating them over the head with the same exact message. Buy my books, buy my books, buy my books. No, we want to get them interested in it, right? We want to show them little snippets, a little sneak peek, maybe a sample, maybe again, a bonus chapter, some bonus content, a blog post that's talking about the characters, the world, something in the real world that relates to what you've written, right? And tie those things together. So that can take time, that takes practice, and you don't have to do, there's enough that you have to do as an author, as it is. I'm not suggesting that you spend all of your time, overthinking your newsletter. This is a piece of content. Oops, where did it go? There it is. You could write this blog post and you could include it in your newsletter for a period of a month or so, right? Have it be there a few times so people who missed it the first time can find it and stumble upon it. You don't have to be cranking out new stuff all the time, but to the extent that you can, to the extent that you're able to provide a new way to look at things, I think that's beneficial. So how I would add that in here, again, we'll just download this image. Whoops. Don't want to download all of them. I want to download that one specifically. And then we will come over here to our newsletter. And we have, so this is going to be Bonnie and Clyde, right? Get to know, oops, there we go. Bonnie. And did I spell it the same way? There's multiple ways you can spell Bonnie.
It's supposed to be IE, but
That doesn't have to be.
just be me.
This Bonnie is spelled with a Y. It is. It just is. Because Clyde has a Y, Bonnie has a Y. It makes sense. Right? Okay. To each their own, right? But then we'll add that image in there. And I'll even show this in the preview mode here too. Oop, where did it go? We'll select that one. Right? I've got it. This is my own personal MailerLite, so I've got tons of images on there myself, and we'll have a link to our blog and a short description, right? And now when we go into preview mode here, we'll see this will start to look a little bit more put together, right? We're starting to build these sections out, right? If anybody has to run and you have any questions you want to get to before you go, because I know we've gone for an hour so far, feel free to drop your questions in the chat and we'll get to those here. Just put "I gotta run" at the beginning of your question and we'll get to it right away. Emma and Kelly, if you can keep an eye out for those. But this is what it would look like, right? And our button is still there, thankfully. And this one is still missing. I don't know why, but you'll see we have kind of a similar theme here. And we're really we're disguising the repetition here, because what is what is the purpose of this blog post? Is to get them to buy our books. What is the purpose of this free book? It's to get them to eventually buy our books. What's the purpose of this survey? Well, maybe it's to get more reviews, maybe it's to find ARC readers, and that way we get them to buy more of our books, right? So it's all the same thing. You're just repeating it in different ways. You're doing it in different different methods, right? You're changing it a little bit here and there, right? Elizabeth has an "I gotta run" question. Where can you find ebook images to insert your cover in on Canva? So I think what you're asking is for these mock-ups, if I'm not mistaken. So these mock-ups here that are from the design templates, I believe those will work. But if not, the mock-ups is actually an app. So if you go to apps here in Canva, it's one of their own dedicated apps. You can search for it. I believe it's there by default too, in some cases, but the mockups app, and then you just scroll through different kinds of products. So they've got mugs, and they've got smartphones, and they've got shirts, and they've got computers, and they've got other sorts of things. And I recommend going with the tablets because it looks about the size of an e-reader. And there's some that have them like with somebody holding them or something like that. They're not always the greatest. This one is very simple. Let me see if I can drag this one up here so it's a little bit easier to see. Maybe we would want to remind them of the book cover here. And so we might want to add our book cover in the bottom corner there, right? Again, to kind of reiterate, this is part of this book. And then I've just dragged and dropped that into the image and it's there, right? Hopefully that helps. Yes, it's the Mockups app, and it is, I think, one of Canva's own apps.
Well, I just learned something new then. I didn't know it was an app.
Yeah.
I thought I just searched for it. So
yeah,
whoever I told earlier.
there are some other elements too. What is it? Are they frames?
A lot too. Canva has a lot of stuff, but Etsy, you can find packs of made graphics and templates specifically for your genre and niche.
Yep.
Facebook,
yes.
all of that. And even though they're in Canva, like sometimes I can't be bothered, so I'll drop $7.
There's also these frames.
Yeah.
Anytime you see this where it's like a landscape with a cloud on Canva, this is specific to Canva, you can take this frame and you can add an image to it. But yeah, like Emma said, if this isn't your thing and you'd rather pay somebody to do it, right? And that's what you want to do, right? Then yeah, you can go that route as well, right?
All right. Latif asks, do I need to have a domain name to be able to start working on my newsletters and promos?
It is recommended, especially with some of the new verification requirements. It's recommended that you do have your own domain. It'll save you some trouble. But that's primarily with your mailing list service and the requirements that go along with verifying the domain you're sending from. So yes, I would highly recommend it. I'm not going to say that it's necessarily 100% required because there's probably some ways in which you can verify without it. But I would get your own domain. Namecheap is what I recommend personally, but you might find other if you're looking to buy a domain. But there's plenty of other services out there where you can buy a domain and set it up. G Suite is also, if you prefer Gmail, you can use that domain to then set up a G Suite email and have a dedicated email for it and that sort of thing. So yes, MailerLite, I do believe, does require it. There might be some folks who are like grandfathered in. It might be what it is. All I know is that I did it, and when it came around. So yes, you'll want to have your own domain. I would
think
recommend.
I think with those recent changes, that Yahoo and Gmail did
Yeah.
really made it so that you should do it.
It's virtually impossible to do it. Yeah, they've made it so hard to do it without having a verified domain that you own that you should just do it, and it'll save you a lot of time. So
Okay. So Trudy is asking, on the swaps, where do you attach the author's reader's link that you share?
Okay.
And also Heidi is also asking, because related to promos and swaps, how many do you recommend in a newsletter?
Sure. Good question. Okay. So, first of all, let's scroll down to that segment here. Oops, right here. Promos and swaps. Okay. So if I were going to do a swap, you could do it in the same content sandwich style, would be totally fine. Depends on, right? If you're doing like a feature swap with the author or an exclusive, you might do it a little differently, right? But I would recommend using their book cover, right? I should be able to find a book cover image here. We've got some other ones. Let's use one of these covers here, right? So it's clear this. Okay, this is from another author, right? And so we might put in, right, the missing piece is the title of the book, or maybe we'll say grab your copy of, right, the missing piece, and we could put in a short, maybe one paragraph description. I'm not gonna, we could go on and on about this text. I'd take 5 minutes to write something short, right? And then the button here, we'd say, I would reiterate the call to action. So grab your copy, right? And then that link is going to go here in the URL for the button, because I'm customizing this button. I would also go to the image and put the URL for the swap in here. And I might even go to this text and put a URL in that text and put it 3 places. And that's where I would put the swap link, right? Now, as for how many should you include in an individual newsletter? Well, it depends. It depends on a few things. If you're putting them directly in your newsletter like this, and there's going to be a dedicated content block for it, 3 to 5 at a time probably is the most. But remember, 3 to 5 content blocks in general is what you should have in your newsletter at most. And so you'd have to balance that out with anything else. Are you also going to be including some information about your books in that newsletter? Well, you're going to have to kind of balance things. And so this is why I recommend that you use a promos or swaps landing page, a dedicated landing page, which I think, Emma, can you drop that
Yeah.
all those links in the chat? Because that's super helpful. Because it includes that link in there to that page. Oh, there it is. Awesome. I'm going to copy that link and let's open that here. And so this is what I use. This is my promos and swaps landing page. And I'm trying a few different things here. So if you have seen this before, I've changed things up a little bit. And these are links to promos. And then I have links to swaps. And what I do is I just link everybody to this one place in my newsletter, and it takes up only one content block. And then it can always be in my newsletter. Sometimes it's at the bottom, and there are people who are always going to scroll through and find it, and I leave it there at the bottom because they're going to find it, and they scroll down there and they go and they click on promos, and that's great. And I can always include it easily, and I still have plenty of room in my newsletter above it to include more and more content that's specific to my stuff, my books, my new releases, you know, what have you, right? And then, you know, on the flip side of that, sometimes I have it featured at the very top if it's because I usually do that on Friday. Well, as you can see here, Free Books Friday is how I branded it. So on Fridays I send out promos and swaps, and that's what I do. And so if you are struggling to balance promos and swaps in your newsletter with your own content in your newsletter, this is a great solution to that, because you don't have to, it's easier to balance. Because now here you'll see I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, about maybe almost 10 promos, right? That I'm participating in that all live on one page, and I can share them all as one content block. I also have the list size where I'm able to get enough clicks for those promos. So that's something else you need to take into consideration. If you're just getting started out and you have a small list, you're not going to want to do as many promos. I have a larger list, right, than some, not as large as everyone, right? There's people out there that have larger lists than me. Emma's one of those. She's got a huge list, right? I know. Her list is bigger than mine, at least, right? And so the bigger your list is, yes, the more promos you can participate in. But that's my recommendation. If you're just doing a one-off swap, this is totally fine and include it as a content block like this. Maybe you have 2 of them down here. Maybe you have a swap and a promo, something like that, and you have them at the bottom. But keep in mind, that's going to take up one of your content blocks. And I recommend no more than 3 to 5. If you're doing a stripped down, minimalist text-based newsletter, it's the same rules apply. Right? The same rules apply, right? You still are going to want to think it in terms of blocks and what you're going to include here. Even if you're writing it more in a sort of casual style, you're going to want to communicate your information that you want to present to them. And you're going to have to find a way to fit that in and include it. So you can only cram so much into your newsletter at a time, right? So if not this, right, if not this, then I would recommend making a page like this. Some other authors have done this. And if you have an example, for those of you who have built one of these, feel free to share your link in the chat so folks can see other examples. This is just mine. Again, I'm science fiction. So you might be like, how can I visualize this as like a, you know, romance or what have you, whatever it might be.
And Jack has a whole recorded webinar showing you how to craft these landing pages.
Yeah.
It's will charge your newsletter swaps, and I dropped the link in chat.
Yes.
So funnel.com/videos.
Thank you, Emma. Yes.
There we go. All right. We already went through that. I think you kind of, Laura was asking about ratio of book personal promo, and you kind of covered that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
it's all personal promo. Well, I guess if you're like promoting yourself, everything is promoting yourself. Maybe the exception is like group promos and swaps where you're promoting another author's book or something like that.
Yeah.
It's just how you disguise it. How do you disguise it? Even things like, you have like, for example, I have a new release coming out. I need some ARC readers. I see that as in a way that's promotion, because even for the people who don't click on the call to action and claim an ARC copy, the other readers are going to see it as, oh, that's an upcoming release. Cool. So it all serves that same purpose. It's just you disguise it in different ways, right? Without having to be like in their face, right? Here's my new release. Here's the release date. Pre-order now, right? Yeah, that could get old. That could get old fast, right?
Okay, Anne Catherine is asking, if you have 2 or more author names, would you recommend having a MailerLite account for each author name to minimize the size of your subscribers?
Yeah, that can be a good idea. it's kind of a pain in the butt to log out and log in to different accounts, but is what I'd say. But if you're fine with that, yes, you can go that route, especially if you have under 1,000 subscribers, you can be on the free plan, and that's sometimes nice. And so right, if you have two pen names that don't have huge followings yet, can save you some money. It can be convenient to have it all in one place, but if you keep those pen names separate for any reason, might also be good to have separate accounts for them, because maybe you don't, right? In this like in this case, this example pen name that we have, Sissy K Picklebottom, this is an invention of, I think, was it Julie Courtney? For those of you who know Damon Courtney, the founder of BookFunnel, that's Julie is his wife, and she's I call them, they're the brain and the heart of BookFunnel, right? And Julie is the heart, and she came up with this and all of these mock-ups, all of these cover images here. Those examples, right, including this one, she came up with all of those, right? And so, for example, we have some that are this kind of romance theme. We also have some that are horror. So if you were writing in romance and you also were writing in horror, maybe you'd want to keep those separate, right? But maybe not. It depends on what you'd want to do. Maybe you would want your readers to know that, hey, I write in these two seemingly clashing genres, and it depends. Is it an open secret, or do you want to keep them compartmentalized? That's up to you. If you do want to keep them compartmentalized, it is easier when you have separate accounts. It is much easier. There are certain genres that mix well, and there are certain genres that don't mix well. So you want to take that into account, right? So, for example, I write in science fiction. I also dabble in fantasy, although I don't have anything. That's not what I'm working on right now. My current projects are all science fiction related. But if I were to write something in epic fantasy, I would feel comfortable sharing that with my science fiction list. Maybe not super prominently, maybe mentioning it here or there, but I personally wouldn't feel a problem with that. I'm in promos with other authors that are in epic fantasy with my books that are in sci-fi. However, like I said, if I were writing romance, that I probably would not cross-pollinate science fiction romance. That's unless it was a science fiction romance and, that specific thing. But if I'm writing science fiction over here and romance over here, or some specific subgenre of romance, then yeah, different accounts make sense. It can save you some money too. So it's up to you. It's up to you. But yeah, a lot of authors do it that way. All right.
right.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Do we have time for more questions, or were you about to?
Yeah. No, we've got some more time here. We can keep going. Or if there were any examples that anybody wanted to see, I know we've done a few here. We could, one thing that comes to mind for anybody who follows, anybody ever heard of Brandon Sanderson? Okay, bad joke, right? Of course you have. He does these he's on YouTube. I'm on YouTube, so I follow him on YouTube, and he does these progress updates. You can do the same thing. So let's make another content block here. So I'm gonna change. Bear with me here, folks, as I get rid of a few of these layers. All right, a few of these layers. So progress update, right? And let's upload a different, let's say we have our next release coming out. So we're going to upload a new book cover here, make it a little bigger. And then I think we go to elements and we go progress bar. And they have these little things. This is a circle. I like these. This is a thing that is kind of built into Canva. And I can change the percentage, right? So maybe I am 67% of the way through the first draft, right? And I can change these colors too. So let me make those some different colors. You'll see here it's pulling colors from the photo that's in the image. This is also a really easy way to just use the color palette for an image that's in here. And we'll say, I might move this text around a little bit. Let me rearrange some of these things. And this is going to look a little clunky here, but first draft, 67%, right? And so we can do our own little progress update, right, in that style, and let them know, hey, this is where I'm at with this, right? Or you can have a landing page where you have, you keep progress updates on all sorts of different things. Well, I guess there's a percentage label. There we go. That's even better, right? Right. And I can delete that there. And so I could use this as an image. This is very simple. I just slapped this together, right? Be ideal if this text were white as well, so it matches, right? And maybe you keep a landing page where you keep progress meters of all of your different projects you have going on, and they can see, oh, yeah, this book is 95% of the way through its final revisions, and this book is 50% of the way through line editing. And there's other versions of this too. So there's a bar like this. If we go back, whoops, it's of course taking me back out, but there's lots of different variations of that you can use, and it is these charts, these sorts of things here, which you can customize these as well, and they're kind of fun little things that you can use. And so again, if we were going to use this, I'll just pop this into the newsletter here. Again, you could use whatever dimensions you'd want. So maybe you don't like the square image, maybe you want it to take up a little less real estate, and you could change this to a more horizontal, right, kind of a bar. You could do that as well, and that would be fine. But we'll upload that image. Let me grab it. There it is. And I'll select that one. And we'll see here. The Revelry is the title of the book. Progress update, right? And we could maybe, if we wanted to include a call to action here, this button would be, see my progress on the rest of the series, right? For example, so they can check in on your progress or something like that, right? That's an example of something that you could include, right? But again, what is this telling your readers? What is this communicating? Don't worry, I'm writing more. There's more coming, right? Stay tuned, right? Don't keep paying attention. Pay attention to me, right? Okay, maybe that's a little, right? But you get the idea. It's going back to that pain point of they're going to finish your books and then it's going to be done, and they're not going to have something else to read, and they're going to want something else to read. And so if you remind them, hey, yeah, this book, it's coming out soon. First draft is almost done. Yeah, that's something you can share with your readers. Absolutely. And it addresses that pain point of, I'm a reader who reads really fast, and I'm going to get through your, 300,000 word epic in a weekend. What's coming next? Right.
Okay, so you pretty much answered Amanda's question, which is if you don't publish very often, do you have any suggestions for engaging content to keep them interested? So that was, you kind of covered that. If they have any other thoughts. And then the next question is, can you suggest a few catchy subject lines for the email newsletter, or is it just newsletter from the author?
Oh, yeah. So subject lines. This is good. I'm not gonna leave this window, so I'll do some examples up here, right? So I would say you generally want to avoid clickbait, right? That sort of thing, but you do want to be catchy, and so there's a balance. One thing that I do when I share my promos, again, I've branded that as Free Books Friday. I use famous slogans, and then I insert Free Books Friday into them. So, for example, Free Books Friday is forever, right? A diamond is forever. Or What's another recent one I used? For everything else, there's Free Books Friday. These work really well. They're fun. It does probably require that your newsletter have a name. Might not always be useful in this context, right? Otherwise, there's the simple and to the point, right? Right. You can, right, if maybe you have a new release that's come out, right? Right. It could be something like new release alert, and this would be your subject line, right? And maybe you could even throw it in here an emoji, right, or something like that. Sometimes useful and for things like this, right? And maybe you just leave it. You leave it at that. I guess it would depend on what specifically you're trying to communicate, right? Maybe you want to ask the question. This is another good one too, right? Especially if you're including a survey, sometimes it's good to include that question, the first question, as the subject line of the survey, right? Right. Have you read? We're being consistent here with the newsletter theme, right? Have you read Lies yet? Right. That's the book here, this example book that we have. You can insert book title here yet, right? Have you read my book yet? Have you or what did you think of this? Right. So there's some examples there. I think the best thing to do is understand what type of subject line your readers respond to, and try to stay consistent with that type of subject line, and then just make little tweaks to it. So is your subject line going to consistently be a question? That makes it easier to come up with catchy subject lines, because you can just ask a new question. You already know what the format of the subject line is going to be. You've decided that part. My subject line is going to be a question 90% of the time. So what's a question that I could ask? And that's going to be very contextual, right? That's going to be very contextual. But what's a question I could ask that's going to get somebody to open this email, right? Sometimes you want to be direct and to the point, and that's where you use things like, pre-order alert, or review copies available, or something like that. But generally, you want to probably keep those for like the 10% of the time where you need them, and they're going to be more effective, right? I hope that helps. Maybe with some more context, I could come up with something more catchy. But I think the trick to having catchy subject lines is to pick the way you're going to format them first. Like I said, that slogans example, I'm always using a slogan when I send that email out. And that makes it very easy for me to, because I already know the format. I'm not having to reinvent the format, and I can focus on finding, in that case, a good slogan that I can use. If I'm asking a question as my subject line, right? Or maybe I'm using a line from my book, right? There's lots of different things that you could do. I think you need to find the format and then create examples out of that, right? And that might seem restrictive, right? You're restricting yourself to a certain format, but I think that's where it gives you some freedom to actually be creative within that sandbox. And yeah, that would be my suggestion. So I hope that helps.
Okay. I think that's all of the ones that we've recorded. I know Judy just asked in the chat, when I create a survey, my subscribers have to hit their answer twice before it submits. Is this how MailerLite works, or am I doing something wrong?
I believe what might happen in some cases is when they click the survey, it links them externally to the survey, and then they have to complete the survey there. So you're not necessarily doing anything wrong. that's where you might want to start your survey with a begin button. And so what I've done here, I have different steps of the survey, but the first one is just the button to begin the survey. And if they click this, I believe it links them to a page externally, opens it up in their browser, because MailerLite can't, I don't know. In some cases, some people's browsers, I guess, it can't perform all those functions. Different email services are going to be different. In some cases, they might be able to answer the whole survey in their browser. In some cases, they might not. Or in their browser, in the email, I mean, in their email client, right? So they have the Gmail app, for example, right? What I've seen typically is, yeah, they're going to click on it and it's going to send them to a link where then they can complete the survey there. So I don't think that you are doing anything wrong, Judy. What I would suggest is making the beginning of the survey a begin button if that's creating some confusion, right? So for example, if you're starting with this satisfaction score, which is what this is, how would you rate my book? You're asking them to do that maybe. And they're clicking on the 5, and then it links them to a page, and then they have to click there again. That's probably what's happening. And so it might be better to start with a button like this, see if you get some better feedback in that case. If you are getting some, or if it's confusing for your readers, start with this begin button, and then it'll show them this again, but that will be less frustrating than having to submit their answer a second time or something like that. So,
Okay. Just double checking.
oh, Caitlin here has an I gotta run question. This has been super informative, and I have some great ideas to try in my newsletter. Okay, I thought it was a question, but no, that's fine. You're welcome, Caitlin. You're welcome. I'm glad you found it helpful.
Oh, I think I did see one that nope, that was the one we just asked.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, actually, there is one. Is there a difference between, say, MailChimp? This is from Catherine K. I've been using MailChimp for 2 years. I do like it. Is it limited relative to MailerLite? So I think they're probably asking about a comparativeness with the two services. I use MailChimp. I find it to be pretty similar to what I've used in MailerLite. They have very similar tools.
They're similar. For me, it was the interface. I prefer the interface of MailerLite personally.
Yeah.
And that's a personal choice, and I don't judge anybody for using MailChimp if you prefer its interface, and let you know that's fine. That's why I use MailerLite, and so features wise, I think they're pretty comparable and pretty even. I mean, they're the two biggest services in terms of numbers and so forth, and competition. So I don't think that there's anything necessarily that one provides that the other doesn't provide in some way. There's little quirks about each of them here and there that you might find different. And so if you're using one and you want to try the other one, I believe both of them do still have free plans that you can sign up for and try out and experiment with. And that's what I would recommend you do, and see if there's some features about them that you like. If there are specific features that you need, a specific type of feature that you need your newsletter service to do, it's possible that there's other services out there that are going to give you more different features. MailerLite and MailChimp are very mainstream, so if there's something different out there that you need that they don't provide, then you may want to look outside of those two for some of those other things, right? Or integrations with certain services, things like that you want to use. So there's reasons to look at other services as well. It's not all just MailChimp and MailerLite. They're just relatively easy to set up and use.
Okay. I see one that's kind of hidden in a thread. Elle's asking, I've got to run. Is there a limit on the pixels when you download an image? I wouldn't have it to be too massive, because then it takes up the whole phone screen.
Right. If you're talking, you can edit these. Now, again, this preview mode here is pretty accurate. Let's preview again here. This is pretty accurate to what it's going to look like on a mobile device. So what I would recommend you do is that you preview using MailerLite or whatever, again, whatever service you're using, use their preview mode to preview what it will look like on mobile, or send yourself a test email and look at that first. MailerLite does allow you to adjust the size of images based on their pixels, right? So you can see here, if you wanted these images to be smaller, I don't know why you would, but maybe you do. If you do, right, you can adjust those images in MailerLite specifically, right, to make them smaller. But a lot of things do get resized as well. So testing is what I would recommend to make sure that it's not doing anything funky. I can edit this image, for example. This is what I can do here, and we'll pull up this image editor where I could resize this. And I believe that's the transform tool. This allows me to also crop the image and so forth, which you may not want to do. But I can change the resolution here. So it's 1000 by 1000 pixels. That's what I use. That's what I specifically have here, set as a custom size. Excuse me. Oh, sorry, folks. That's what I have set there, 1000 by 1000 pixels. So if you have something much bigger than that, yeah, you might want to make it a little smaller. Also, just so that it opens and loads easily for your readers. A lower resolution image is generally going to be relatively lower resolution. I mean, not low resolution, but relatively low resolution is probably going to be better. So I could change this to say 500 by 500, for example, and it would shrink it down and make it a little bit smaller. Each service is going to have a different way to do that and offer you some different tools. That's just how MailerLite does it. So you might want to do that a little differently. All right.
Okay.
Well, unless there are any other examples you want to see me create here, any mock-ups you want to see me make, we filled in most of these content blocks. We could have done some exclusive content, I suppose. I could have done one of those here. In fact, let me do one of those real quick while people are throwing some questions at us. And so an example here, we're not using a progress update anymore. We're doing like exclusive bonus chapter, right? Whoops. There we go. And I will say for subscribers only. This is just an example, right? And you might rearrange the elements here. You might use a different image background. I'm just keeping things simple for right now. And maybe this is our book cover that we're going to use for that exclusive bonus chapter. Maybe I'll rearrange these elements here, but I think you get the idea. And then I could link this to, for example, a BookFunnel restricted page is great for this type of content because a BookFunnel restricted page requires them to be a subscriber. And sometimes you can even have it set to be a subscriber on a specific list. That's what you want it to do, right? And let's upload that image. Hold on, there it is. And it'll take a moment. I'll select that. And here you'll see exclusive bonus content would be, well, or it's a little repetitive there. So maybe I would want to change this to something like, get your copy of Truths, right? Your exclusive copy of Truth, something like that. You might want to do a different, you don't want to repeat the same call to action or the same headline over and over and over again. And then, download your bonus content, right? For example, that could be something that you could use. So that's an example of that as well. All right. Okay. Well, I think that should be good. This was an experiment, folks, in this kind of webinar too, building a newsletter. And as you see here, we've built in all these content blocks. And granted, this example is rather long, right? I would probably, if this were my newsletter, I would have this blog post here. The free book is a good one to include. The progress update, the survey. That's about 4 blocks right there. And then maybe one more block, depending on what you're wanting to include, and then go from there. If you're going to do this in a minimalist style and you just wanted this to be text, you could honestly, I didn't customize the text here, but if I have a really good 2 to 3 sentence description of what this is, I don't need this image. You wouldn't need to have it. If you're wanting to go the super minimalist text route, you can do that. The advantage of the images is it lets people really quickly see what each block is about. And if that interests them, they can jump to it. But if you prefer to do it without images, you can do that too. There's no right or wrong way. Being consistent helps, is what I found too. Be consistent with your style, how you build your newsletter. So if your style is not this, it's totally fine. Whatever your style happens to be consistent with it. And I think that helps a lot because readers know what to expect when they open up your newsletter. It's familiar to them. And I think that's key as well. That shouldn't be, that we don't want to underestimate how important that is. All right. Yeah, a good mix too. You want to think about you want to balance it out, right? It's all about balance, right? If everything in your newsletter is an image, that might be a little tricky. Yeah, and your deliverability might be hindered. Another thing that will hinder your deliverability though, and this is something people don't realize, is the number of links, the number of external links in your newsletter. Email service providers will check for the number of external links. And if you have an excessive number of external links, you're more likely to go to spam. And that has nothing to do with has nothing to do with the images necessarily. But where you can run into trouble with this is if you're linking to absolutely everything, right? You have social media platforms and you have your website and you have 24 different external links that you're linking to, right? Try to find a way to pare that down. Like with promos and swaps, for example, if you're doing a whole bunch of them, yeah, that's where you're probably going to want a landing page separate for that. So all those links go to one separate place. So yeah, you do want to have a balance with whatever route you take, right? Whatever route you take, you should balance it. So images, text, links, it all has to be kind of a happy medium, right?
Thank you for watching. Check out these other videos from BookFunnel, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel.